Why was she even there, if no one cared to hear her voice? The table was long, cold metal, papers scattered, maps pinned, a screen frozen mid-frame with satellite footage. Men in uniform spoke over each other, voices colliding, cutting across. Orders, predictions, tactical chatter, all of it circling the same drain. And there she sat, still, silent, invisible. Captain Elena Torres, 32, ranger, linguist, field operative. She had been called in at the last moment, a replacement for someone injured during the last rotation. Nobody had bothered to introduce her properly. Nobody had asked for her read on the situation. She studied their faces, one by one. A general tapping his pen too hard. A major sweating at the collar, his words tumbling like they were trying to escape him. A younger officer cracking knuckles under the table, trying to mask nerves. They were all fighting for space, fighting to sound like the one with the answer. And in that chaos, her plan, the one detail she carried in her pocket like a secret, was dismissed before it was ever spoken. But she kept watching, waiting. She had learned long ago, sometimes silence buys more than words. The mission they argued over wasn't theoretical. It was urgent. A hostage situation gone wrong in a crumbling border town. Civilians trapped. Enemy fighters dug in, hidden among families. Every idea tossed across the table ended the same way. Too risky, too costly, too uncertain. Her chest burned. She had been there on those streets months before. She had seen the alleys, the roof lines, the way the dust rolled in at sunset and blinded even the best trained eye. She knew something the others didn't, but should she speak? Would they even listen? Her throat tightened, her tongue heavy. What if they laughed? What if she wasted the last ounce of respect she hadn't yet earned? But then, a pause, a silence that cracked open like a door left ajar. The general had turned toward the screen again. He rubbed his forehead and muttered, "We're running out of time." Elena leaned forward almost without meaning to. Her chair creaked. The sound was louder than she expected. Heads turned, annoyed. The general's eyes narrowed. And finally her voice broke through, low, steady. "There's another way." The room stilled. No one spoke. But it wasn't attention that greeted her, not yet. It was suspicion, doubt, the kind of silence that asked, "Who the hell are you to interrupt?" She felt her pulse in her fingertips. Her father's voice echoed in memory. "Courage isn't loud, Mija. Sometimes it's just refusing to swallow your words." She didn't swallow this one. She set it on the table, piece by piece. Her plan. Not reckless, not loud, just different. And as she spoke, her silence began to transform. How do you measure silence? By seconds, or by the weight it leaves in the air? When she finished speaking, the room didn't erupt in debate the way it usually did. It didn't crumble into noise. It froze. A beat, then another. The general's hand hovered midair, still gripping his pen. The young officer with the nervous knuckles actually stopped breathing for a moment. Even the projector hummed louder than the people around the table. Elena knew what they were thinking. Is she serious? Her plan wasn't conventional. It wasn't neat. It wasn't the kind of thing that wins career medals or headlines. But it was the only one that factored in the humanity of the people on the ground. Civilians caught between walls, children kept as shields, families too afraid to flee. Every other plan on that table had calculated numbers, maps, and losses. None had considered the faces. She had. Still no one spoke. Finally the general cleared his throat. "You're suggesting we split the advance, use the blackout window." "Yes, sir," she said quickly, cutting him off before the hesitation could turn into dismissal. Her voice wavered just slightly, then steadied. "The power grid in that sector is fragile. I worked with local engineers during my last rotation. I know which substation is weakest. If we cut it precisely at night, their comms will scramble. They'll panic. But civilians will instinctively head toward the hospital. It's the only building with independent generators. We can predict the movement, channel it." "You're assuming the hospital doesn't become a target itself. One colonel snapped. She didn't flinch. I'm assuming we place a team ahead of time, not assault, observation, low profile, protect the movement. No civilians pinned down. We don't storm into crossfire, we guide the escape routes before it collapses. It sounded simple, it was, they all knew that. But the silence didn't return to her this time. Debate trickled back in, though slower, less sharp. Officers leaned closer to the map. Fingers traced her suggested paths. Doubt was still there, thick, heavy, but curiosity had cracked open the door. For the first time since she walked into the room, Elena didn't feel invisible. But visibility had its price. She could sense it, the quiet judgments, the unspoken mutters. She's green to us. She's not from this circle. She doesn't know the politics above this table. She had seen that look before, years ago in training, when she'd been the only woman in a squad of 12. Back then, the silence around her had been heavier, not just doubt, but dismissal. And back then, she had learned something she never forgot. Sometimes the only way to be heard was to hold your ground long enough that they couldn't step around you. Her voice shook once, then steadied again. We don't need everyone to agree, we just need it to work. The general studied her, his face unreadable. Then with a slow exhale he said, "Draft it in detail tonight." That was it, a small sentence, but it carried more weight than applause. The meeting dissolved, papers shuffled, chairs scraped. Officers drifted into side conversations, but she remained seated, still staring at the map. Because now came the real test. The plan wasn't just words anymore. It would be tested in dirt, in dust, in blood. And she couldn't shake the fear curling inside her. What if I'm wrong? What if they followed my lead straight into ruin? She pressed her palms against the cold table to ground herself. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to breathe slow, steady. Her father's voice echoed again. Silence is heavy. Don't carry it unless you must. When she finally rose, the room was almost empty. Only the young officer with the nervous knuckles lingered by the door. He hesitated, then blurted out quietly, "Ma'am, it was a good call." She blinked. No rank, no introduction, just words clumsy but real. It caught her off guard. Respect rarely came softly. She nodded once, "Thank you," and walked out. The night air outside the compound was cooler but not clean. The dust still hung low, carrying the bitter tang of burned fuel. Soldiers moved in and out of barracks, boots echoing against concrete. Somewhere beyond the wire, artillery muttered like distant thunder. Elena paused under a flickering light. For the first time in months, she felt her pulse slow, but not for long. Because she knew what came next, convincing the men she would fight beside. Not the ones with stars on their collars, the ones with dirt under their nails. Her silence wouldn't protect her there. The first briefing with the field team wasn't much easier. 10 men in a dim tent, each carrying fatigue and suspicion in their eyes. Maps pinned to canvas, lanterns swaying faintly. She explained the plan again, crisp, clear, precise. But when she finished, a thick silence fell. Different from the one at the table, this one wasn't doubt, it was challenge. The sergeant leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "So you're telling us we sit in the dark, play babysitter, and hope the civvies don't scatter into the wrong streets. That's the master plan." Elena kept her voice steady. "We're not babysitting, we're channeling. They'll follow the hospital lights if the blackout hits right. We guide the stream. Quiet, fast, controlled." The sergeant's lip curled. "Sounds like gambling." "It is," she admitted, then softer, "but so is storming and guns up." That silenced him, not because she'd won him over, but because she hadn't lied. Another man spoke up, older, lined face, quiet voice. "She's not wrong. I've seen civvies move like water when the lights die. They follow where they think safety is. If she's right about the generators." The sergeant shot him a look, but didn't push further. It wasn't victory, it was a crack, enough to slip through. Elena held their eyes one by one, refusing to drop her gaze. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust the plan. If it fails, you hold me accountable. Her chest ached even as she said it, because she meant it. And that was when the silence shifted again. Not acceptance. Not yet, but not dismissal either. Something in between. They wouldn't follow her because of who she was. They would follow only if the plan earned it. She left the tent with that truth heavy on her shoulders. But she also carried something else, the faintest spark of hope. Later, alone in her bunk, she stared at the notebook spread open in front of her. Hand-drawn maps, annotated grids, scrawled reminders of local landmarks only she remembered. She traced one finger over the outline of the hospital. Her chest tightened. She could still hear her mother's voice, faint from years ago. Hospitals are the last light in any city, Elena. Even when the streets go dark, people run toward them. That memory had fueled the plan. It wasn't strategy pulled from a textbook. It was pulled from childhood, from nights hiding during blackouts back home, when she was just a little girl clinging to her mother's hand. She closed her eyes, saw that hallway again, the sterile light, the fear, the waiting. And she whispered to herself, almost like a vow, "This time, no child waits in the dark." The lantern beside her sputtered once, then steadied. So did she. Why did it feel colder than it was? It wasn't the desert night, though the temperature had dropped, crisp wind carrying grit through the gaps in the compound walls. It was the silence, the kind of silence that came before movement, the kind that filled lungs with something heavier than air. The convoy was ready, engines idled low, muffled under tarps, gear strapped down tight, men checking weapons, not speaking more than necessary. Elena pulled her vest closer, tugging the straps until they cut into her shoulders. It wasn't discomfort that made her tighten them, it was ritual. A way to remind herself that every strap, every buckle, was one less excuse for failure. She glanced at the faces around her, some familiar now, some still blank walls. They listened to her plan, followed the preparation. But following on paper and following into darkness weren't the same. The sergeant Morales caught her eye. He didn't nod, didn't smile, just stared as if waiting for her to flinch. She didn't. "Convoy moves in 5, he said, voice flat. Her heart answered with a heavy thud. 5 minutes. She climbed into the back of the lead truck, the metal cold even through her gloves. A lantern swung above, throwing sharp shadows on the canvas walls. She steadied her breathing, counting silently, the way she had as a girl when fear crept under the door at night. 1, 2, 3, you're still here. The truck jolted forward. The convoy rolled out. The road stretched dark, broken only by headlights cut low. Dust spiraled behind them, rising and falling like ghosts. No one spoke. Just the engine's hum, the creak of gear, the occasional cough muffled by fabric. Elena's thoughts wandered despite herself. Back to the hospital. Back to the blackout she remembered from childhood. Her mother's hand clutching hers too tightly. The way shadows had swallowed their street when the power failed during the storm. And the way people poured into the hospital like moths to a flame, searching for light, for sound, for something that proved the world hadn't collapsed completely. That memory wasn't strategy. It was fear, pure human fear, and it had stayed with her. Now she was betting not just her own life, but theirs, on the idea that fear followed patterns, that people in darkness always ran toward what glowed. She closed her eyes, whispered to herself, "Please let me be right." The convoy stopped short of the town, engines cut. The silence swelled again, louder than the rumble had been. Morales spoke first, his voice a gravel whisper. "Teams split here. Alpha takes observation on the west, Bravo with me on the south. Tours, you've got Charlie on the north sector." She felt the eyes, heavy, waiting to see if she'd hesitate. She didn't, understood. She jumped down from the truck, boots sinking slightly in sand. The night air clawed at her throat, dry and bitter. Her team formed around her, 3 men, shadows with rifles. No words passed, just movement. The town loomed ahead, low, uneven rooftops silhouetted against faint starlight. Windows black, streets narrow, alleyways twisting like veins. It looked abandoned, but they all knew better. They moved silent. Step pause, step pause. Elena's ears strained for every sound, the crunch of gravel, the scrape of cloth, the faint bark of a dog somewhere distant. Each sound carried weight. Each silence carried more. At the corner of an alley, she raised a fist. The team froze. Ahead, the hospital's faint glow rose just above the rooftops, barely visible but steady. It was like a promise waiting in the dark. Her chest tightened. That was the beacon, the line between chaos and survival. She signaled low. The team pressed against the wall, rifles angled. Then a noise, sharp, metal against stone. Her breath caught. She scanned the shadows. A figure moved across the alley, fast, crouched, too small to be armed the way fighters were. She whispered, barely audible, "Civilian." The figure darted again, closer this time. A boy, no older than 12, barefoot, eyes wide in the dark. He froze when he saw them, like an animal caught between instinct and terror. One of her men raised his rifle. "No," she hissed, hand snapping out, "down." The soldier hesitated. The boy bolted, vanished into another alley. Elena's pulse hammered. If the blackout hit and people scattered like that, the streets could choke with panic. One wrong movement and hundreds could be trapped in crossfire. She pressed her back to the wall, forcing herself to breathe slow, forcing the memory of her own childhood fear to stay sharp, not blur. Morale's voice crackled low in her earpiece. "Status, Charlie." Elena hesitated. She could say all clear. That was what protocol would expect, but her gut screamed otherwise. She whispered, "Movement, civilian, we hold position." A pause, then Morales again. "Copy, stay dark." "Stay dark." Her jaw clenched. Minutes crawled. The blackout window was closing in. When the grid collapsed, everything would happen at once. Fighters scrambling, civilians flooding, soldiers moving. No time to think, only to act. Her hands trembled. She forced them still. The weight of silence pressed against her chest again. Doubt whispered, "What if the boy warns them? What if they're already waiting?" She shut it out, looked at her men. They waited, eyes on her. It hit her then, the strange twist of fate. Hours ago, they hadn't wanted her voice at the table. Now, in the dirt, in the silence, 3 armed men watched her for the signal. The power to speak or stay silent was hers. And it terrified her. The blackout came sudden. One moment a faint hum in the wires above. The next, nothing. The town sank into pure darkness. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, like a dam breaking, sound flooded, shouts, doors slamming, feet pounding cobblestones, a woman's voice calling a name, children crying. The chaos was alive, breathing. Elena's pulse leapt. She lifted her hand, motioning forward. "Move." They slipped through the alleys, shadows among shadows. Civilians surged past them, clutching bundles, pulling each other, eyes fixed on the hospital glow. It worked, just like she remembered. Fear pulled them toward the light. Her chest ached, relief and terror mixed. Then gunfire, sharp cracking, too close. Civilians screamed. The surge faltered. People dropped, ducked. The flow twisted, breaking apart. Her stomach dropped. Enemy fighters had anticipated. They were firing not to kill, but to scatter, herding people into dead ends. Elena raised her fist again. Her men froze. She felt the weight of choice pressing down. Do they reveal themselves to protect, or stay hidden and lose the stream? Her throat burned. She whispered, almost to herself, "No more children in the dark." Then she made the call. "Cover fire now." The night shattered. Her team's rifles cracked. Sparks lit the alley walls. Civilians screamed, then surged again, toward the hospital, toward the light. Elena pressed herself against the wall, heart slamming. Every round fired meant risk. Every second of noise meant fighters closing in. But the stream moved, the people ran. Her silence was gone, in its place action. And there was no taking it back. How long could chaos be guided before it swallowed itself whole? The air cracked with gunfire. Not steady volleys, bursts, scattered, unpredictable. Muzzles flashed in the dark like lightning. Civilians shrieked, stumbling, pushing through the narrow streets. The flow toward the hospital surged, then broke, then reformed again. Elena's back pressed hard against the wall, her rifle steady in her hands though her pulse tried to shake it. Her team fired in short, controlled bursts, covering doorways, rooftops, alleys. Each shot had to count. No wasted noise, no wasted rounds. She could hear Morale's voice in her earpiece, low and sharp. South Sector taking contact. Alpha report. Charlie, hold your stream. Her jaw tightened, holding. But were they? A woman stumbled past her, clutching a child tight against her chest. The girl couldn't have been more than 7. Hair tangled, face streaked with dust and tears. Elena's throat closed as she watched them vanish toward the hospital's glow. She remembered herself at that age. A storm knocking out the grid in her neighborhood, the world swallowed in black. She remembered clinging to her mother's dress, terrified that shadows were monsters. The hospital light had saved her then. Not the medicine, not the doctors, just the fact that something in the darkness still shone. And now she was trying to make that happen for someone else's daughter. Her radio hissed again. Morale's urgent this time. Charlie, your corridor's collapsing. Fighters on rooftops. If they cut the line, it's done. Her men looked at her, waiting. She swallowed hard. If she ordered them to push forward, they'd expose themselves. Risk being cut down. If they held, civilians would be trapped. The silence stretched too long. One of her men muttered, "Orders, ma'am." Her breath caught. She wasn't used to the word ma'am from men who didn't want her here. It froze her for a second, then melted into steel. She whispered, "We move." They advanced low, rifles raised. Shadows rippled along rooftops. Fighters crouched, silhouettes shifting. Elena gestured sharp. One of her men broke left, another right, their barrels snapping upward. The air thundered again. Stone chipped from the walls, sparks spitting as rounds ricocheted. Elena darted forward, slid into a doorway, breath ragged. She fired upward, one shot, another. A figure toppled, slamming against the rooftop edge before disappearing into the dark. Her ears rang, her chest burned, but the corridor opened. Civilians surged again, screaming, stumbling, clutching whatever they could carry. The stream flowed. For a heartbeat, relief washed through her. Then she heard it, a sound that cut sharper than gunfire. A cry. Not of terror, of pain. She spun. One of her men was down, leg twisted, blood soaking the dirt. A shard of shrapnel jutted from his thigh. He gritted his teeth, trying not to scream again. The silence inside her cracked. She dropped beside him, pressing a hand against the wound. Hot, slick blood seeped through her gloves. "Stay with me," she whispered. The soldier's breath came in ragged bursts. "I'm fine," he was. His face was pale, jaw clenched so hard it shook. Elena's chest ached. She had trained for this. She had patched wounds, dragged bodies, followed protocol. But it was different when the choice wasn't clinical, when it was hers alone. She looked at the others. Their eyes asked the same question her heart screamed. Do we save him, or do we hold the corridor? She froze. Silence roared louder than the battle. And then a memory. Her father's voice, soft on the night he left for deployment. "You'll face choices where neither side is right, Mija. In those moments, silence is the enemy. Speak. Decide. Live with it." She pressed harder on the wound, blood seeping faster. Her voice broke out, sharp, unshakable. "You two hold the line. I'll get him out." The men didn't argue. Orders spoken in silence would have died. Orders spoken aloud carried life. She hooked her arms under the injured soldier, hauling him upright. He groaned, teeth clenched. His weight nearly dragged her down, but she forced her legs steady. Step by step, she pulled him back toward cover. Each grunt, each hiss of pain cut through her like glass. But behind them the stream still flowed, the corridor still held. By the time she lowered him behind a wall, her arms shook, muscles burning. She yanked her pack open, hands moving faster than her mind. Gauze, tourniquet, pressure. His breath steadied slightly, though his face was pale, eyes half closed. She whispered again, softer this time, "Stay with me." And for the first time, she realized she wasn't speaking only to him. She was speaking to herself. The firefight stretched long into the night. Civilians poured toward the hospital. Fighters pressed harder, desperate to collapse the streams. Every decision Elena made weighed heavier. Every silence carried more risk. But slowly, painfully, the tide shifted. Alpha Sector reported cleared. Morale's voice came through again, rough but steady. South Sector holding. Civies moving. Charlie, report. Elena pressed her radio close, chest heaving. Corridor open. Casualty stabilized, stream intact. A pause, then Morale's, "Copy, good work." It wasn't praise, but it wasn't doubt either. It was respect, sharpened by necessity. When the last wave of civilians pushed through, the hospital glowed brighter. Not literally, but in her mind's eye. A beacon against the chaos. A light that proved her plan had worked. Elena sagged against the wall, sweat stinging her eyes. Her arms still trembled from dragging the wounded soldier. Her throat ached from the words she hadn't spoken, the fear, the doubt, the guilt. Because no matter how many lives they'd steered toward safety, she couldn't shake the image of that boy, the barefoot child who had bolted into the alley. Where was he? Had he made it to the hospital, or had he vanished into the dark? The silence offered no answer, and it tore at her. Dawn crept in, pale light bleeding into the streets. Smoke hung low, stinging her lungs. The team regrouped in the courtyard of an abandoned house, faces drawn, clothes torn, bodies slumped against cracked walls. Morale stood in the doorway, his rifle slung. His gaze fell on Elena. For the first time, it wasn't suspicion in his eyes. "Your plan worked," he said. She didn't answer, couldn't. Because the silence in her chest was louder than any words she could find. It wasn't pride, it wasn't relief. It was something more complicated, a mixture of guilt, exhaustion, and the faintest flicker of hope. Her plan had saved lives, but it had cost blood too, and the faces she didn't see, the ones lost in the dark, haunted her. She looked at Morales, her voice low, steady. "Respect isn't earned by being right. It's earned by carrying the weight when you're wrong, too." He studied her, then nodded once. No argument, no sarcasm, just a soldier recognizing another. And in that silence, she felt something shift. Not the noise of victory, not the thrill of triumph. Just the quiet, heavy dignity of being heard. How do you sleep when silence itself feels dangerous? The night had bled into dawn and dawn into day. But none of them rested. The team huddled in the abandoned house, windows blocked, rifles within reach, boots still on. The wounded soldier, Ramirez, lay pale but breathing, leg bound tight. Elena sat against a cracked wall, notebook open across her lap, pencil trembling in her hand. She tried to write. Notes, adjustments, calculations for the next phase, but the pencil tip hovered uselessly above the paper. Her thoughts weren't equations. They were faces. The woman clutching her daughter, the men herded by gunfire, the boy barefoot in the alley. Where was he now? She closed the notebook with a snap, the sound too loud in the small room. One of her men stirred awake and shot her a look. She muttered an apology, though she didn't mean it. The silence was suffocating. By midday, Morales called them together. Dust clung to his face, his voice rough from smoke and fatigue. "Hospital is overflowing. Comms say more families are still hiding in the east blocks. Command wants us to push further." Groans, curses under breath. One man muttered, "We're running on fumes." Morales ignored him. His gaze flicked to Elena. "Your idea saved lives, but if we go deeper, we're on their ground, not ours. You sure you're ready to lead more than a corridor?" The weight of his words pressed on her chest. She could hear the doubt inside them, but also a challenge. This wasn't dismissal, it was testing. She straightened her shoulders. "If there are still people out there, we don't stop, we adapt, we find them." Her voice didn't waver, but inside she wasn't sure if she was convincing him or herself. The push east began at dusk. The streets felt tighter there, walls leaning inward like they wanted to collapse. Trash piled in corners. The smell of rot mixed with smoke coating her throat. Every step echoed too loud. They moved block by block, slow and tense. Doors hung open. Curtains fluttered in broken windows, but no voices, no footsteps. Until they found the first. A woman crouched in a basement stairwell, arms wrapped around two children. Their eyes hollow, cheeks sunken. She flinched when soldiers appeared, shielding her children with her body. Elena lowered her rifle instantly, crouched low. Her voice softened, barely more than a whisper. "Está bien, you're safe, come with us." The woman's eyes filled. She didn't move, not until Elena held out her hand. Slowly, cautiously, they emerged. The boy clutched Elena's sleeve so tightly his nails dug into her skin. Elena's chest ached. She didn't brush him off, she let him hold on. They led the family toward the hospital route. Each step felt like carrying a piece of the weight she'd chosen to bear. But trust didn't grow evenly. Later that night, as they regrouped in a gutted shop, one of the younger soldiers spat into the dirt, glaring at Elena. "This isn't what we signed up for," he muttered. "We're soldiers, not shepherds. We're sitting ducks every time we slow down for another crying kid." His voice rose, sharp enough to cut through the tired silence. "We follow her plan, we all die here." The words hung heavy. Elena felt every eye on her, some hard, some uncertain, some waiting to see if she'd finally break. Her jaw tightened. The easy choice was silence, to let Morales handle it, to stay in the shadow of command. But silence had nearly drowned her before. She stepped forward, meeting the young soldier's glare. Her voice was low, deliberate. "We're not here to survive by leaving others behind. If that's what you signed up for, you're in the wrong war." His nostrils flared. "And if your plan fails?" Her throat tightened, but she forced the words out. "Then I fail with it, not you." The room stilled. The weight shifted. Some men lowered their eyes. Morales watched her a long moment, then gave a small nod as if to say, "That's how you lead." The young soldier said nothing more, but his silence this time wasn't dismissal. It was uneasy acceptance. Later, when the others finally drifted into uneasy rest, Elena sat outside the shop under the stars. Her rifle rested across her knees, but her eyes weren't on the rooftops. They were on the sky. She thought of her father again, how he'd left for deployment when she was just a girl, how he hadn't come back. Not in a coffin, not in a ceremony, just a telegram, a folded flag and silence. She had asked her mother once why he never wrote, why his last letters had stopped. Her mother had only said, "Sometimes soldiers carry silence heavier than their packs." Elena had sworn she wouldn't be like that she wouldn't disappear into silence, leaving others guessing, hurting. But here she was, leading men who didn't trust her, carrying lives she might not save, speaking only when silence threatened to kill. Her chest ached with the contradiction. Her father's shadow lingered like smoke. She whispered into the night, "I won't vanish, not like you." The stars offered no answer. The next morning, Morales pulled her aside. His face was lined with exhaustion, but his voice was steady. "You've got their attention now," he said. "They're watching you, waiting to see if you stumble." She frowned. "And you?" He shrugged. "Doesn't matter what I think. What matters is you keep proving yourself, out loud. Don't let silence eat you. They'll respect your voice if you keep using it." The words hit harder than he knew. She thought of the boy in the alley again, the one who had vanished. She thought of her father swallowed by silence. And she realized every step she took, every order she gave, wasn't just about saving civilians. It was about breaking the cycle she had grown up in, the silence that had defined her life. That night, as they pushed deeper into the east blocks, the suspicion became reality. They stumbled into a courtyard that wasn't empty. Figures moved in the shadows, too controlled, too precise to be civilians. Rifles glinted. An ambush. Gunfire erupted. The night shattered again. Elena hit the dirt, ears ringing, heart slamming. Her men scrambled, shouting, firing back. Civilians screamed from somewhere nearby, trapped between walls. Elena's throat burned with the scream she didn't release. Instead, she forced her voice sharp, cutting through the chaos. Cover left, push them out, keep the corridor open. Her men responded, not hesitantly, immediately. For the first time, they didn't look to Morales, they looked to her. And in that moment, in the chaos and fire, Elena realized something. Her silence hadn't earned their respect. Her voice had. But respect came with a price. As the last fighter fell, the courtyard quieted. Smoke hung thick. Bodies sprawled in the dirt. The civilians they'd tried to protect pressed against a wall, eyes wide with terror. And in the corner, Elena saw him. The barefoot boy. Alive. Her chest squeezed. She started toward him. But then she froze. Because in his eyes she didn't see gratitude. She saw something else. Fear. Of her. Of the soldiers. Of what she represented. Her hand trembled. She lowered it slowly. Because she realized saving lives didn't erase their fear. And silence couldn't heal it. How do you lead when the people you save still look at you with fear? The courtyard stank of gunpowder and dust. The boy's eyes lingered in Elena's mind long after they'd left, wide, hollow, distrustful. He had clutched the wall as if the soldiers who had cleared the street were just another threat waiting to consume him. Her men had pulled her away before she could reach him. Now, hours later, they were holed up in another ruin, a gutted schoolhouse, chalk dust and shattered glass underfoot. Ramirez groaned in the corner, fever burning his skin. The others cleaned rifles, drank water in silence, avoided one another's eyes. War didn't always break you in battle. Sometimes it broke you in the quiet after. Morales called a meeting in what used to be a classroom. He unfolded a dirt-streaked map on a broken desk. The men circled, faces gaunt, shadows under their eyes. Elena stood just outside the circle. She could feel it again, that weight, that unspoken reminder that she wasn't truly one of them. Morales tapped the map. Orders came down. Command wants us to fall back, prioritize our wounded, evac birds inbound in 6 hours. A murmur went through the group, half relief, half unease. Relief at the thought of leaving. Unease at the idea of abandoning what they hadn't finished. Elena's throat went dry, she stepped closer. And the civilians. Morales didn't look up. Command didn't mention them. The silence that followed was heavier than gunfire. Her pulse thundered. She spoke before she could stop herself. There are still families trapped. We've seen them. You know it. If we pull out now, they won't make it. A soldier shook his head. Not our mission, not our fight. Another muttered, we already saved more than anyone expected. Elena's fists clenched. She wanted to scream, to shake them, to drag them back into the streets and show them the faces, the woman in the stairwell, the boy's hollow eyes. Instead, her voice came out hoarse, almost breaking. We don't get to choose whose lives matter. For a moment, no one spoke. Even Morales looked at her, expression unreadable. Then he said quietly, our orders are clear. We leave at dawn. Her stomach twisted. But there was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. Later that night, Elena slipped outside. The moon hung low, casting broken light over the ruins. She pulled her notebook from her pack, open to the pages she hadn't shown anyone. Inside was a map she had drawn herself, marked with circles, small X's, places where she believed people were still hiding. She hadn't told Morales. She hadn't told anyone, because deep down she had known Command wouldn't care. And now, standing in the rubble, she realized she couldn't let that silence define the end of this mission. Her breath trembled. She whispered into the night as if speaking to her father as if he could hear, "I won't walk away, not again." She didn't sleep. At dawn, as the soldiers packed up, she felt her choice harden inside her chest like stone. Morales caught her eye as they loaded Ramirez onto a stretcher. "You good?" he asked. She forced a nod. "Yeah." But she was. She waited until the others were distracted. Then she slipped into a side alley, pack slung over her shoulder, rifle across her chest. She broke away, alone. The streets swallowed her quickly. Each step carried both fear and resolve. Her chest pounded with the weight of her decision. She knew what this meant: desertion, disobedience, betrayal in the eyes of her unit. But betrayal to her conscience if she stayed. Every shadow seemed sharper without her team. Every sound, a creak, a dog barking in the distance, sent a jolt of panic through her ribs. But she kept moving, following the circles she had drawn, her map clutched tight. And she found them. A family huddled in a burned-out shop. A man carrying his mother on his back, too afraid to call for help. A group of children hiding in a sewer entrance. Each time she found them, she whispered reassurance, guided them to safer streets, pointed them toward the hospital corridor. Each face seared into her memory. Each step another cut in the rope that had once tethered her to her team. By afternoon, she stumbled into an apartment block marked on her map. The air inside was stale, heavy with smoke. She climbed the stairs, heartbeat quickening. And then voices. Not civilians. Armed men. Her breath caught. She ducked behind a wall, listening. Words in clipped tones, orders, plans. Her blood ran cold. They were setting traps, roads laced with explosives, ambushes timed for when soldiers would fall back, for when her unit would move to extraction. Her heart hammered. She couldn't leave, couldn't pretend she hadn't heard. But the weight of choice pressed down harder than ever. Go back to warn her team and admit she had deserted them, or keep silent, save herself, and let them walk into death. Her decision was made the moment she thought of Morales, of Ramirez, burning with fever, of the young soldier who had questioned her, who still deserved to live even if he doubted her worth. She tore out a page from her notebook, drew a rough map with shaking hands, marked the traps, the ambush points. Then she ran. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed. She didn't stop until she saw them, her unit, moving slow toward the extraction zone. She stumbled into view, breathless, dirt-streaked, eyes wild. Rifles turned on her instantly. "What the hell?" one of them started. Elena shoved the paper into Morales's chest. "It's a trap. They know you're leaving. Roads are wired. They're waiting for you." Silence, heavy, disbelieving. One soldier snarled, "You left us, and now you show up with this." Elena's chest heaved. She forced the words through ragged breaths. "Believe me or don't, but if you go that way, you're dead." For a moment, she thought Morales would order her restrained, that her betrayal had cost her everything. But then he looked at her map, at the details too sharp to be fabricated, at the ink smudged with sweat. His jaw tightened. He barked orders to redirect, no hesitation. And just like that, her silence became a weapon, not of shame but of survival. That night, after they had moved to a safer route and evaded the ambush, Morales approached her. His face was hard, unreadable in the firelight. "You disobeyed orders," he said. Her throat tightened. "I saved lives." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Both can be true." He turned away, leaving her with the weight of both guilt and vindication. She sat in the dark, head in her hands, breath trembling. because she knew she had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. And the war wasn't done with her yet. How much betrayal can one heart carry before it breaks? The night after the ambush they avoided, the unit dug into a shell of a warehouse. Concrete walls riddled with holes, roof half gone, cold air slipping in. The men ate in silence, rations chewed without taste. Elena sat apart, back against a pillar, watching shadows flicker across their tired faces. No one thanked her. No one had to say it aloud she had saved them. They all knew, but trust was fragile and hers was already cracked. Some saw her as a hero, others a liability. When she tried to meet their eyes, a few looked away. One glared openly. The wound of her disobedience cut deep. Later, as the others slept, Morales sat beside her. His voice was low, steady, carrying weight. "You risked everything for them today," he said, "but don't think that erases what you did." Elena didn't look at him. "I didn't do it to erase anything." "Then why?" Her throat tightened. She could have told him the truth about her father, about silence, about promises whispered to ghosts, but the words tangled, heavy, unspoken. Instead, she whispered, "Because leaving them behind would have killed me faster than any bullet." Morales studied her a moment. His face softened, but only slightly. "You're not wrong," he said, "but right doesn't always survive war." The next morning, distrust boiled over. They were preparing to move when the young soldier, the one who had doubted her since the stairwell, snapped. He threw his pack down, voice sharp, words cutting. "Why are we listening to her? She walks away, breaks orders, and suddenly she's calling the shots." Others shifted uncomfortably. No one interrupted. Elena froze. His anger wasn't just against her. It was the anger of exhaustion, of fear. But his words struck hard, feeding doubts she had buried. She met his glare. Her voice shook, but she didn't let it falter. "You're alive because I didn't stay silent." "Or maybe we're alive in spite of you," he shot back. "You think you get to gamble with all of us. That's not leadership. That's selfish." His words sank like knives. For a moment no one moved. The silence stretched. Then Morales's voice cut through, sharp. "Enough, we move now." But the fracture remained. The march toward extraction felt heavier than any before. Every sound carried danger. Every turn felt like a trap. Elena kept glancing at the young soldier, his anger simmering like coals. She wanted to speak, to explain, to make him understand, but no words came. And in that silence, something darker grew. They reached a bridge at dusk, half collapsed, edges crumbling into a river that stank of oil and decay. The unit began crossing single file. Elena took the rear, eyes scanning rooftops, alleys, every flicker of shadow. Halfway across it happened. A blast split the air. The bridge shuddered. A section caved, taking 2 men with it, screams. The river swallowed them whole. Bullets followed, tearing from both banks. Chaos. Elena dropped, rifle snapping up, heart pounding. Her ears rang with the storm of gunfire, with the roar of water below. She shouted orders, clear, sharp, desperate. Some listened. Some didn't. Morales barked alongside her, trying to pull them into some semblance of defense. But amid the chaos, she saw him. The young soldier. He wasn't firing, he wasn't covering, his eyes were on her. And in that moment, in the purest chaos of war, he turned his rifle not at the enemy, at her. The world slowed. Her chest froze, breath caught. "Why?" His finger tightened on the trigger. Then Morales lunged, shoving her down, the shot cracking wide. Morales's voice roared above the gunfire. "Move, move." Elena scrambled to cover, but her body trembled. The betrayal had struck harder than the ambush. Someone she had bled for, someone she had protected, and he had chosen her as the enemy. They fought their way across. Not all made it. Ramirez, too weak, too slow, was left behind when the bridge crumbled further. His scream echoed until the river swallowed it. When the firing finally stopped, The survivors stumbled into an alley, breathless, bloodied, broken. The young soldier was gone. Whether dead in the chaos or vanished into the ruins, Elena didn't know. Part of her didn't want to. That night, as they regrouped in a ruined factory, Elena sat in the shadows. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Morales knelt beside her, silent for a long time. Then he said, "You did what you had to. Don't let one man's hate erase that." She didn't answer, because deep down it wasn't just hate, it was fear, distrust, a mirror of every silence she had carried her whole life. Her father had disappeared into silence. The boy in the alley had looked at her with fear, and now her own brother-in-arms had turned a weapon on her. She pressed her hands to her face, a sob breaking through before she could stop it. Morales didn't move, didn't comfort, just stayed beside her, his presence saying what words couldn't. War wasn't just killing her body, it was dismantling her soul. When dawn came, Elena didn't feel like a soldier anymore. She felt like a ghost walking among the living, carrying the weight of betrayal, death, and silence. And yet she rose, she strapped her pack, she shouldered her rifle. Because there was still one day left, one chance to decide if all this suffering would end in silence or in something more. What does respect sound like when silence has carried your whole life? The factory was cold, its walls scarred with years of neglect. The unit sat in the shadows, fewer now, shoulders bent under exhaustion and grief. Ramirez gone, others scattered in chaos. Morales paced slowly, his face a mask of stone. Elena sat apart, rifle across her knees. Her hands no longer trembled, but that was worse. She felt nothing. Or maybe she felt too much, locked deep beneath a weight she couldn't carry anymore. The boy's face still haunted her, hollow eyes, silent fear. Her father's silence echoed inside her chest, and the soldier's betrayal, a wound no bandage could touch. She thought maybe this was what war wanted from her, to grind her down until her silence became permanent. But then Morales spoke. "Command still wants us out by sundown, but intel says civilians are trapped in the old metro tunnels. Last group, dozens of them." The men shifted uneasily. They didn't need the rest of the sentence. If left behind, those people would die. Morales's gaze settled on Elena. For the first time, his voice carried no challenge, only certainty. "This one's yours." The tunnels were dark, the air damp, the silence heavy as earth. Their boots echoed softly on cracked tiles. Graffiti smeared the walls. Rats skittered in the corners. The further they went, the tighter the air felt, like the city itself was swallowing them. Elena led, flashlight beam cutting through the dark, her breath steady, even though her chest burned. And then a whisper, a cough, a baby's cry. They found them. Dozens of civilians huddled in the dark. Old men, mothers, children, hollow-eyed, thin, terrified. The boy was there, barefoot, clutching his sister. His eyes widened at the sight of her, the soldier who had returned. But he didn't move toward her. He only watched, silent, wary. It broke her. The extraction point was 2 kilometers away. Wide open streets. Enemy territory. They had barely enough strength left to carry themselves, let alone shepherd a crowd. But there was no choice. They moved slowly, carefully, civilians tucked between them. Every sound felt like it would draw fire. Every corner felt like it hid death. And death came. Shouts, gunfire, fighters pouring from the alleys, cutting them off. The unit formed a wall, rifles snapping, civilians screaming. Elena shouted orders, voice sharp, pulling the civilians through gaps, forcing them forward. Bullets sparked off concrete. They weren't going to make it. Not all of them. The street split, one route narrow, shadowed, leading to the extraction zone. The other wide open, where enemy fire thickened. Elena saw it instantly, saw what had to be done. She met Morales's eyes. He saw it too. His lips parted, but no words came. Because he knew. She nodded once, stepped forward, raised her rifle, and shouted, "With me." She broke from the group, charging toward the wider street, gunfire slamming around her. The enemy shifted, attention ripping toward her. She fired back, fast, fierce, drawing them, pulling them away from the narrow path. Her men shoved the civilians into the shadows, morales at the rear, driving them forward. She didn't look back. Couldn't. Every step was fire, every breath smoke. Her shoulder burned where a round grazed. Her legs screamed. But she kept moving, kept shouting, kept firing. The boy's face burned in her mind. Her father's silence. The soldier's betrayal. All of it crashing into one truth. Her voice, her choice, her defiance. She would not vanish quietly. When her rifle clicked empty, she drew her sidearm. When that emptied, she threw a grenade, the blast shaking the street. When nothing was left, she pressed her back to a crumbled wall, chest heaving, vision blurring. The enemy closed in. But in the distance, faintly, she heard it. The thrum of rotor blades. The evac bird. She smiled, blood in her teeth. Because they would make it, morales, the civilians, the boy. Her silence had carried her this far, but her voice, her defiance, had given them a chance. When morales and the civilians reached the extraction zone, the bird lifted them into the sky. Dust whipped, children cried, men shouted. The boy sat pressed against his sister, eyes wide, staring down at the ruins. He whispered something no one heard. And for the first time, he didn't look afraid. Elena's name was never broadcast, no medals, no speeches. But in the silence of that war, her choice carried like an echo. Morales remembered the fire in her eyes. The civilians remembered the soldier who shouted them toward life. The boy remembered the woman who refused to disappear. And when stories were told, long after the war ended, her name wasn't always spoken. But her silence and the respect it earned lived on. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.